Hi, my name is Grayson Lewis, and today I would like to explore a few different techniques to dry up your Codeigniter views. Dry is a principle of software development aimed at reducing repetition. Simply stated, the acronym DRY stands for Do Not Repeat Yourself. Now, in my opinion, the current release of Codeigniter ships with an inherent deficiency, that is, the lack of a master layout file. When we look at other frameworks such as Ruby on Rails, Django.net, and Zen Framework, we find that the concept of the master layout is ubiquitous, and sometimes I wonder why my favorite framework doesn't ship with a master layout by default. Now the good news is that creating a master layout for your site using Codeigniter is very simple, and today we'll explore some of the different techniques that you can use in your Codeigniter views to centralize your page header, site navigation, and page footer into a single master layout. Before diving into Codeigniter, let's hit the groundwork for the screencast by talking about the PHP include function. Right now we're looking at a page called Product 1, and we've got another page called Product 2. The pages are identical in terms of their layout. Let's take a look at the HTML for these two pages. Here's Product 2, and here's Product 1. We have an HTML document start to finish. At the top, we have a header, some navigation, in the middle we've got some content, and at the bottom, a footer. Now let's assume that we want to make a change to our footer for our entire site. We come in here and we say, follow @Grayson on Twitter. Now when we go back to our page, as you know, we'll see that update on Product 1, but when we go to Product 2, we won't. So obviously, that's a problem. And remember that in the real world, we'll have far more than 2 products to display, and we don't want to have to maintain page layout individually. So let's clean this up. We'll refactor the product page into 3 distinct files, a header, a footer, and our content. So let's go ahead and grab our footer, and we'll paste that into a file called footer.php, and then let's grab our header. And we'll paste that into a file called header.php. And I'm sure you saw this coming. Now we will include header.php, and at the bottom of our document we will include footer.php. Of course we'll need to make this change for product 2 as well. So we'll come down here, chop out the footer, and replace it, and then we'll replace our header with include header.php. And we'll come back to product2.php, refresh, and now we see our site-wide footer. Let's take this one step further and modularize our site navigation into its own file as well. Then we'll nest that navigation file into the header file. So let's come back to our header.php file, and we'll copy out this entire block, and we'll replace it with php include, this time navigation.php. And within our navigation.php file, we will paste our navigation, and let's go back to the page, refresh, and it still works. So now we've modularized our page layout into a header, a footer, and navigation controls. Now, let's repeat the same scenario, but this time using Codeigniter. We'll use the same refactoring that we used in our PHP include example. Underneath my Views folder, I have a folder called Layout and a folder called Products. Within our Layout folder, I've created our controls. We have a header, a footer, and navigation. Now, if we look at footer.php, you'll see that it's exactly the same as in our previous example. Same goes for Product 1 and Product 2. The only contents within Product 1 and Product 2 are the contents related to this particular product. To display Product 1 and Product 2 using Codeigniter, let's create a controller called Test. And within that controller, we'll create 2 methods, Product 1 and Product 2. Now, to load our views from within a controller method, we would do something similar to this. We'll say load a view called header, then load the Product 1 view, and finally load the footer view. We'll do the exact same thing for Product 2. Let's go back to our browser and make sure that still works. We'll need to change our URL to test product 1, and we're good. Now, if you remember in our previous example, we nested our navigation into our header using the PHP include command. I want to open our header file so that you can see how that works in Codeigniter. Here, instead of doing a PHP include, I'm doing a this load view navigation. So we're loading a view within a view. In other words, Codeigniter supports nested views. So if we have the ability to use nested views, what if we go back to our products page and just like in the last example, we include our header file at the top of our content. So we say PHP this load view layout header, and then at the bottom of the page we say layout footer, and let's go ahead and repeat that for product 2. So at the top we've got a header, and at the bottom we've got a footer. Now if we go back to our controller, let's go ahead and remove our header call and our footer call for both methods. Let's go back to the page, refresh, and it still works. But wait, if we can nest views within other views, let's flip the way we've been thinking about includes. Instead of including our layout above and below our content within each page, let's instead include our content within our master layout. In other words, let's set up a master layout for our entire site and yield our content within that master layout. Let's start by creating a view called master.php. The first step that we'll take is we'll go into our header control and we'll copy and paste the entire contents of that control into our master.php file. We'll do the exact same thing for footer.php. So now we have the layout for our entire site in master.php. The only thing that is missing is our content. So let's load that here. Now, before we can make this work, we'll need to go into our product 1 page and remove our references to our header and footer controls. If we come back to our test controller, now instead of calling this load view product, let's call this load view layout master. And let's go to the browser, refresh, make sure it works, and it does. So now we're yielding the contents of our product 1 view inside of our site's master layout. But obviously, for this technique to work with all content views, we'll need to make this dynamic. So let's go back to our master page, and let's replace this static call to product 1 with something dynamic. Content. Now we'll be able to inject our content into our master layout. So if we come back to our controller, we'll need to initialize the value of content. There's 2 ways that we can do that. If we want to set up an array for our view data, we can say content equals product 1. And now we'll simply pass our view data to our view call. If we come back to the browser and we refresh that, it still works. Now let's apply the same technique to product 2. So we'll start by deleting the header and the footer from the contents page. We'll come back to our controller, and instead of loading the content for product 1, we'll load the content for product 2. Come back to our browser, and now we've got product 1 and product 2 both injecting content into our master layout. So after refactoring our site controls into a single file called master.php, we're left with a single master layout here, which can be used throughout our site across all of our views. There are a couple improvements that we can make to our master layout. The first is to add a title placeholder so that we can set a view's title dynamically as opposed to using a static string. So let's replace this static text with something like echo title. The only problem with this approach is that if for some reason we forget to set a title within our view data, this will error out. So let's set a little fallback for ourselves. We'll say if there's a variable called title that's set within the view data, we will print PHP sandbox and the title that was passed. If no title was passed, we'll print null. To get this wired up, all we need to do is go back into our controller and then add a variable called title to our view data. We'll set this one to product1, and for product2, we'll set it to product2. Now if we go back to our browser and we refresh the page, you'll see that our title here, show product, goes to product1, and for product2, it goes to product2. The final improvement we'll make is to set a site-wide default layout. So rather than calling this string layout/master directly, we'll simply make a call to the default layout for the entire site. To get this set up, we'll need to start by creating a master controller that our other controllers can inherit from. So within the core directory of your Codeigniter installation, create a file called my_controller. And then let's define a class called my_controller, and we'll extend CI controller. We don't need this function, so let's delete it. What we do need is a class level attribute called layout. Let's go ahead and initialize the value of this layout to, let's use single quotes, layout master. Now, if we go back to our test controller, and instead of extending CI controller, we extend our app controller or our master controller, now we'll have access to that default. So we'll simply need to replace this static string with this layout. And we'll do the same for product2. Let's go back to the page and make sure that it still works. And it does. So this approach will give us the flexibility to change the name or location of the master layout in the future without having to update each call to that static string layout/master. Setting up a default will also facilitate the process of overriding the default within a particular controller. So for example, within a welcome controller, we could set the value of this layout to a layout file with a single column. And then maybe in a product controller, you could set the value of this layout to a layout file, say, with 3 columns. Now in the real world, you'll be dealing with dynamic pages, not static ones like product1 and product2. So a more realistic controller would look something like this. A controller called products, which extends our master controller, my controller. And then within that controller, we'll have a method called show, which is responsible for displaying the contents of a single product. Let's walk through this top to bottom. First, we'll retrieve the product from the database. Second, we'll prepare our view data, just as we did before. We'll set our title to be equal to the product name, and we'll set our content to be equal to products/show, which is our view. Finally, we'll render the view by running this load view, and we'll pass as parameters our default layout and our view data. Let's see what this looks like in the browser. Instead of looking at our static product1 page, let's click on the products page, which shows us a list of all products, and then we'll click on show to see the contents of a single product. Just as we saw before, the title is set dynamically, and the contents of our view are being injected into our site's default master layout. We started by refactoring our layout controls into their own distinct files. We then put all the pieces back together using the PHP include function. We then repeated the same exercise using Codeigniter's thisLoadView syntax. Upon realizing that Codeigniter supports nested views, we decided to flip our thought process upside down, and instead of including our layout controls above and below our content, We would instead inject our content into a master layout file. Hopefully this screencast has given you a few ideas about how to dry up your Codeigniter views by implementing a site-wide default master layout for your application. Thanks for watching.